Good morning to you. Marty Braden here. Before I begin each of my short videos, I always take a moment to welcome those who are new to my channel, so welcome, as well as take a moment to briefly explain why I'm doing these videos. I recently finished writing a book that I titled An Atheist's Delusion and just finished publishing it. Yeah. To help promote it, I decided to set up this YouTube channel so that I can talk about it, and hopefully it will help to get it exposed to a much wider audience. My motive in promoting this book in this way is not to promote myself. I'm simply trying to promote the message of my book, which is a Latter-day Saints perspective on the atheist evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins' anti-theist, anti-Christ book that he titled The God Delusion. I put up an author's website for information about my book and about myself at www.anatheistsdelusion.com. Anyway, I'm going through my book and recording short 15-minute videos where I take on every last one of arguments that Dawkins puts forth, or what he calls postulates, and I call them guesses, that are behind all the big questions such as, does God exist? Is there life after death, or do we just become a dirt pile and it's the end of that? What is the truth about the origin of life? And so many more ubiquitous questions that, in my opinion, matter greatly. It's my hope that my viewers, like you, will take my invitation to take a notepad and jot down any thoughts, or at a minimum, jot down each of the reference legs of evidence that I will put forth and have put forth so far, and measure whether or not your belief cursor, where it's moving on Dawkins' percentage of possibility or probability spectrum, towards the God exists marker or the God does not exist marker. And then you'll notice it moving, I assure you. Now, lastly, I hope you will subscribe and carry on a conversation with me by sharing thoughts down in the comment part of these videos. Ask any questions you have, and yes, share any arguments you have about each of the topics we'll be going through as I go through the book. I only ask that we keep things from being contentious between us by remaining civil and kindly in our comments and conversations so that all can enjoy the dialogue. The last video I did was part 30, which was a short review on my book's Chapter 2, the first subtitle, The God Hypothesis, the chapter, and the first subtitle was Polytheism. This video is part 31, and it is titled Monotheism. So let's go ahead and jump where I left off and get right to it. Richard begins this subtitle, Monotheism, by quoting Gore Vidal, an American intellectual and writer who seems to be confused on social and cultural sexual norms as he sees them through the eyes of a bisexual man. Here's the quote from Gore Vidal. "The great unmentionable evil at the center of our culture is monotheism. From a barbaric Bronze Age text known as the Old Testament, three anti-human religions have evolved: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. These are sky god religions. They are literally patriarchal. God is the omnipotent Father, hence the loathing of women for 2,000 years in those countries afflicted by the sky god and his earthly male delegates." End quote. With such a statement, Mr. Vidal reveals his anti-theist, anti-Christ leanings, as well as his loathing for religion itself, and in particular his disgust for the Christian religion and its specific God, Jehovah, who is the God of the Old Testament and was made flesh, as we learn in the New Testament. His name was Jesus the Christ. Mr. Dawkins appears to have taken ownership of Gore's disliking of religion, that's for sure, and particularly his hatred of the God of Abraham, by taking Vidal's disgust for him and making it his own. We do that to ourselves. We see it when we take ownership of it. Here's what Richard said right after quoting Mr. Vidal. Quote, the oldest of the three Abrahamic religions and the clear ancestor of the other two is Judaism. I'm going to put little parentheses quotes in there, so here I'll say, this is me each time. This is me. The house of Israel, in other words, and in particular the Jews. He continues, originally a tribal cult of a single, fiercely unpleasant God. This is me. A God of justice and mercy, you mean? This is, continuing with Dawkins, morbidly obsessed with sexual restrictions. You mean the law of chastity? And with smell of charred flesh. You mean the law of sacrifice and burnt offerings as types and shadows of the grand sacrifice of the Lamb of God, his beloved Son, Jesus, who was to come? He continues, with his own superiority over rival gods. You mean eternal sovereignty? And with the exclusiveness of his chosen desert tribe. You mean Israel. Jacob's name was changed to Israel. See at the churchofjesuschrist.org, type in the search, Why did God change Jacob's name to Israel? Fascinating article. You're going to love that essay. Quite opinionated, our friend Richard is, isn't he? The fact is, Richard doesn't seem to have any understanding of or any clue as to what the true nature of the laws of God, our eternal Father, are and why he gave them to mankind. Nor does he really know what God's only begotten Son, Jesus Christ, and his role is in God's, our Heavenly Father's eternal plan of redemption and happiness with any depth of understanding. To me, it is just a surface understanding that an atheist would have. Richard goes on to elaborate on the three largest religions and condemns every one of them, and he condemns the sin of using the sword to spread their gospel far and wide. So do I. Richard states, for my purposes, all three Abrahamic religions can be treated as indistinguishable. So I shall have Christianity most in mind, but only because it is the version which I have happened to be the most familiar with, he says. And I say familiar is the operative word here, Richard. Richard is clearly unschooled in the true nature of God and his pure gospel, known as the gospel of Jesus Christ, and Jesus' role as the Savior of mankind. Continuing on, the differences matter less than the similarities, Richard says, and so I shall not be concerned at all with other religions such as Buddhism or Confucianism, etc. Indeed, there is something to be said for treating these not as religions at all, but as ethical systems or philosophies of life. End quote. In my opinion, Richard's understanding of each of these three major Abrahamic religions and the belief systems they teach, and in particular what the nature of the object of their faith is, meaning the nature of Jehovah, the God of the Old Testament who became Jesus of Nazareth, and the God of today's Christianity, continuing, reveals how little he comprehends the true nature of God the Father and that of his only begotten Son, Jesus Christ. Nor does he know what the pure gospel of Jesus Christ even is, which gospel he dispensed to the Jews in the meridian of time. As I said, Richard's misunderstanding of these things is the result of him taking what the world's religions teach, which teachings were contaminated by apostasy over the past 2,000 years. As Joseph Smith said, today's religions have a form of godliness, but they deny the power thereof. This denial of religions past and present is the fruit of apostasy. It is also my opinion that Richard is ill-informed about my faith as it's taught in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It is not Mormonism, Richard. Mormonism is a disparaging nickname directed towards Latter-day Saints and their beliefs. My faith is a restored gospel that Jesus himself revealed to the young prophet Joseph Smith Jr. Jesus restored his church once again to the instrumentality of revelations to his latter-day boy prophet that he raised up for the purpose of restoring the fullness of his gospel in its purity. For these, the latter days. This required that his authority to administer the gospel's laws and ordinances, especially those ordinances, be conferred upon the heads of his prophets and apostles. Once again, that's the foundation, that Christ is the rock, and then on that rock he built his church with apostles and prophets and pastors and teachers that have the authority given to him from Christ and the ones before that he built this church's foundation upon. Richard mistakenly places all of these religious claims squarely in the grouping of supernatural gods and man-made religions, or should I say evolution-made religions. At least that's where he thinks religion came from. Richard's negative and extremely critical bias towards religion itself, and more specifically his bias towards the three major religions that sprang from Abraham's descendants, reflects how blinded and skewed his scientific mind has become. Richard's mind has become so blinded that he continually looks past the mark entirely and is therefore unable to see the forest for the trees, religiously speaking. Richard's deeply held vexation towards religion itself has kept him from doing the work of communicating directly with believers on a personal level, one-on-one basis like myself, and therefore he's not allowed himself to get a clear understanding of what each group of believers truly believe. He's failed to set aside his atheistic bias. I prefer to get my information from the horse's mouth, so to speak, and not from religious critics. It's called being fair and balanced. That said, I will say that setting aside one's bias is a very difficult thing to do for all of us, including Richard. It's my opinion that if we give it our best effort, we have a greater capacity to learn. Richard's arguments against monotheism, expressed throughout this subtitle, becomes one long diatribe against any and all religions. allowing very little other side arguments to have any space for their views to be presented in a fair and balanced way. In my opinion, this is what has kept Richard from providing any real evidence to help prop up his claim that God does not exist, at least so far. The only thing Richard has proven so far is that he hates religion. It's also the only thing so far that is incontrovertible. It's irrefutable. That's what he's done. I feel sad for Richard for not having had a real, honest religious experience with the pure and perfect gospel of Jesus Christ, because if he had, he might have, in my thinking, experienced a full and complete paradigm shift. Richard's disdain towards even the idea of God's existence overpowers his ability to be still and set aside his atheistic bias and hatred long enough to do an honest and fair search of these beliefs, such as the beliefs I have, using my own words to describe them and not using my critics or our critics that he's found somewhere from listening to our critics and what they've said about the Latter-day Saint beliefs. If he had asked active members like myself what we actually believe about God and his true nature, he may have been more accurate in his criticism of us. This is a big reason why I wrote this book. I wrote it to give the real truth about my beliefs so that you, my readers and my viewers, can hear it from the horse's mouth and not from Richard's cankered, biased heart and the biased and cankered hearts of all those that are anti-LDS or anti-Mormon. The fact that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has such peculiar beliefs from the other religions existing in the world today, I would have thought that Richard, with his fact-driven mind, would have done a more exact and deeper dive into the Latter-day Saints' claim of the restoration of the pure gospel of Jesus Christ through the ministrations of heavenly messengers. In reading Richard's book, I read nothing about these claims. Sure, they're spectacular and peculiar, as I said, but by writing them off because they're spectacular, like the angel appearing to Mary in the Bible, or Jesus being raised from the dead, or his disciples being thrown into a fiery furnace like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the Old Testament were, who, after standing in those flames in that furnace for several minutes, simply walked out alive and unharmed. Wow, doesn't make them false though. I share these examples because Richard appears to have gained only a veneer understanding of the gospel as it's taught by the prophets of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Richard views everything through the bifocal lens of science and the quasi-doctrine of evolution. Those are the bifocals. Those are the two things that make up that bifocal lens of this atheist. His worldview has a lifelong history of biased mapping against any and all religions and their supernatural claims. And that's sad to me. Richard has missed out on, and continues to miss out on, the rich story of the restoration of the pure gospel of Jesus Christ and the relationship he is denying himself with the living Christ. A good example of what I'm talking about here is what Richard specifically said about my faith as a Latter-day Saint. Here's what he wrote about my faith in his book, The God Delusion. Quote, Joseph Smith, its enterprisingly mendacious inventor, went to the lengths of composing a complete new holy book, the Book of Mormon, inventing from scratch a whole new bogus American history, written in bogus 17th century English, end quote. My response to Dawkins' mocking of my faith, the prophet Joseph Smith, and the Book of Mormon may surprise you. But let me share an excerpt from a book titled Seer versus Urim and Thummim, written by the director of Joseph Smith Foundation, Hannah Stoddard. Hannah provides a wonderful compilation of historical record references that describes the translation process. Joseph Smith said the following. Joseph Smith said he followed the principle and truth of bringing forth the Book of Mormon by the gift and power of God. And I quote, we cannot perhaps reiterate enough that the Lord coined the use of the term translate to describe the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. It did not come from the scholars. It did not come forth from the historians. Neither did it come forth from speculative members in the 19th century. The designation translation appears at least 30 times in the revelation Joseph is known to have received during the translation process. Why did the Lord use the term translation repeatedly if he did not mean translation? He could have used any word. He could have used any set of words. Should we question the Lord's choice of words in the revelations? End quote. The revelations referred to by Hannah are found throughout the Doctrine and Covenants and are listed as footnotes that Miss Stoddard lists throughout her book. Hannah's book provides a factual repudiation of the seer stone narrative that was promulgated by David Whitmer, one of the three witnesses of the gold plates, but thereafter became an apostate and enemy of Joseph Smith. On its surface, Whitmer's claim of how Joseph Smith used a seer stone in a hat to translate the Book of Mormon without even using the plates themselves seems to be an invention of a frenzied mind. That said, we must remember that this so-called translation took place in 1829 over a period of just 85 working days, less than 3 months. Joseph said that he used the Jaredite Nephite interpreters, which we can refer to as the Urim and Thummim, to translate the Book of Mormon. Who's telling the truth? Was it the stone that's dark and chocolate with stripes through it, or is it the Urim and Thummim, clear stones, given to him in that stone box that was discovered and shown to him by the angel Moroni? Who's telling the truth? I recommend that you, my readers, get Miss Stoddard's book and read it in its entirety, and then you decide what's true. Think about this. Joseph did not have a smartphone that would light up when turned on, where he could call up translation apps for various languages and see each of their translation in 19th century English. A cell phone is certainly a spectacular invention. It's almost supernatural. It would have astounded the people of Joseph's day. I remember when Kindle, an e-book, first came out years ago. As a reading device, you would sometimes find yourself sitting in the passenger seat of your car trying to read the screen of your Kindle. But due to the brightness of the sunlight coming in, its screen was often difficult to read on. And so what did you do? You'd bend over into the crawl space covered up by the dashboard, in front of the dashboard where it was dark, or the most dark, and that would allow you to read by the light of that screen, right? Well, I'm going to stop there because there's so much more that will be discussed about this so-called criticism that Dawkins gives about the Book of Mormon being a lie, being a fraud, and Joseph Smith being a fraud and a seeker of treasures. It's an interesting topic, but I'm going to leave it there. List your comments, list your questions, but just know this. I appreciate it. Keep it civil, but it'll be fun. I'll do my best to answer any questions or any comments. I'll do my best to respond. But until then, I wish you continued success. Goodbye.